Hope, hope, hope. Well, time to talk about TK. TK is, of course, the Digidestined of Hope. His, full name is, if I can pronounce it correctly, is Kakeru TK Takaishi, something along those lines. He is the Digidestined of Hope. He is the younger brother of Matt. And his Digimon partner is Patamon, who digivolves from Tokomon. In Tokomon, so cute. And if you've seen the series, then you know that Tokomon has giant teeth. And I think Patamon does too. I also have a pink version of Tokomon that is actually just a stuffed version instead. Yeah, these are old. These are old. Kind of old. They're not 20 years old, but they're getting there. So I have the two Tokomon. I have my berry plushie in the background, since, Patamon turns into a bunch of angels. I'm going to use a bunch of female angels for my Anjuamon video, for the Kari video, because I've got them on. So I figured I'd break out Barry and have him be here in the background, and he can get to know the Tokomon. Be nice, you two. TK, Digidestined of Hope. His Digimon is Tokomon, which digivolves into Patamon, which digivolves into Anjuamon, which digivolves into Magna Anjuamon, which digivolves into Seraphimon, which digivolves when DNA digivolving with the rest of the group, digivolves into Omnimon. And then he also has two additional forms. He has Pegasusmon, who is Patamon digivolving with the Digi-Egg of Hope. And he also has Shakuamon, who is the DNA digivolved form of Anjuamon, and Ankylamon, who is Cody's Digimon, champion level for his Digimon Armadillomon. I'll go over Cody's video when I get to him. The second group end up having the ability to all DNA digivolve, and all of them have the ability to armor digivolve. TK's timeline basically starts in 1995. Him and Matt end up seeing the battle between Parrotmon and Red Greymon. This is before their parents got divorced. They end up seeing it. They end, of course, getting scanned by the guardians of the digital world, whatever you want to call them. Ends up getting scanned by them, and they are, of course, chosen to become Digidestined along with the other original 8. And then we have probably a couple of months later or so is when their parents get divorced. As I mentioned with Matt's video, they get divorced. We don't 100% know why. My answer is one wanted a career one place, one wanted a career the other place, and it was just irreconcilable differences. As I've said, my parents are divorced. I kind of know a bit how this goes. And although Matt and TK's parents seem to be, their divorce seemed to be a bit uglier than my parents' was. So they have that. TK goes off and lives with his mom. Matt goes off and lives with their dad. We don't really, TK and Matt, as I've mentioned, Matt is extremely protective of TK, but he doesn't really know 100% how to handle being around the kid because it's been a while since he's spent prolonged amounts of time around TK. And then, of course, we fast forward a bit, and then, of course, we get to 1999 and the Digimon timeline, and this is, of course, when TK, along with the other original 6, go to the digital world. He gets to meet Tokomon. And then, of course, they have to deal with Kuwagamon, and then, of course, they, then they all travel around the digital world, making more friends. The Digimon digivolve, of course, and Tokomon digivolves into Patamon. Tokomon seems to be the last one, or Patamon seems to be the last one to digivolve most of the time, or at the very least into Champion, and then, of course, into Ultimate. And then, of course, we get through, they travel around a lot, Ty and Matt, Matt's kind of learning a little bit for how to be an older brother and stuff like that. And, of course, Ty is, you know, he's a little more experienced because he's always had Kari with him. And then, of course, we get to where Devimon splits them all up. And TK and Patamon actually end up in a place that's called Primary Village, which, as I mentioned in a previous video, is where all the Digimon go when they are reborn. After a Digimon is destroyed in the digital world, as I said, I do not 100% know if this applies to if they die in the real world, they get the ability to be reborn in the digital world. I don't know. But at the very least, if they're destroyed in the digital world, they do get the ability to be reborn. Their data is kind of also like purified, quote unquote. And they go to the primary village and they end up meeting this Digimon there that's called Elecmon, who's just like this electric type mouse Digimon. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they had to kind of go around that a bit too in regards to Pikachu, but he's not yellow. He's red and orange and bluish, so I guess I kind of got away a little bit with that. And Patamon and Elecmon kind of don't get on very well right away, and they kind of end up not like brawling, but they do like a weird tug of war type of contest that TK tells them about. And it just, you know, they battle and then they become friends. You know, TK and Elecmon and the rest of the Digimon become friends that are there because we find out that, and I'll go over Primary Village a little bit more in a separate video, but we have Primary Village and like you take the Digi eggs and then you're supposed to like rub them until, you know, because you give them affection and you rub them until they hatch. I'll go over the, you know, Primary Village. But, you know, they do that and they have fun with Elecmon. And then, of course, they get, you know, reunited with the rest of the Digimon, or with the rest of the Digidestined, but it's the battle against Devimon, of course. And in that battle, that is when Patamon digivolves into Angemon for the first time to protect TK, because this is one of the first times where TK has been directly in danger. Although they did kind of show during the episode with Elecmon that Patamon got like close to digivolving. But since TK wasn't actually in 100% danger and Elecmon wasn't necessarily like a 100% threat, you know, didn't digivolve. And what ends up happening is, you know, Angemon battles Devimon, summons all of his strength, and his guiding light is what guides the rest of the Digidestined to where him and TK are. And and Angemon sacrifices himself in order to defeat Devimon. And then, of course, this is when we get the first instance where it is shown how a Digimon can be reborn. And his feathers pile up on the ground, and he turns into an egg, and the feathers turn into an egg. And then TK, because he knows about Primary Village, he knows that they can come back. He holds on to the egg. And then, of course, as then they're they talk to the rest of the Digimon that are on the isle. They talk to Genai, and Genai's like, well, yeah, Patamon will come back. He just has to rest as an egg, and then he'll hatch again. I don't remember if it's Genai that explains it or if it's Elecmon that says it, but one of the two says it. And then TK's like, okay, and it's like he takes very good care of the egg and everything. He carries it with him for a little while until it hatches. But their Digimon friends that they made on File Island help them, and then they head off to go to the continent of Server. I do not remember specifically if the egg hatches right before they leave. I think it hatches right before they leave, and then it just turns into this little blue blob thing that is adorable, and I don't remember what it's called. But so we get those moments, and of course they travel to Server, and they end up they have to start dealing with Edamon. And TK and they travel around a little bit there, and then Patamon, or the little blue blob, turns into Tokomon at one point. And Tokomon kind of gets kidnapped at one point, along with I think I don't remember if it's Agumon that gets kidnapped too, or if it's just Tokomon, because they get kidnapped by Edamon's minions or whatever. But then we have, they end up finding them, and then, of course, they find their crest, and TK, of course, gets the Crest of Hope, if I can get my stage left, stage right set up correctly. And then, of course, then we have they travel a bit. They end up fighting Datamon, of course, and Tai and Metal Greymon are separated from the group, and they end up no, they separate from the group, and then the group kind of splits off into different groups. TK and Matt stay together for a little while, and then Matt leaves TK at kind of this theme park place, along with, he leaves Tokomon there with him as well. And, Matt goes off because he's going to go try to find some of the others. And this is when he goes off and he has to have like the whole restaurant fiasco with Joe. But TK ends up at the theme park because that's where Matt leaves him, because it's like, well, it's a place where he'll kind of be safe and he can, be entertained by everything. This is when, of course, Devimon comes along. Devimon's plan is, of course, to make a rift between TK and Tokomon, so that way, Tokomon can't digivolve. And, he, is like, well, why don't we just go and have all this fun and everything? And he's, tricking TK, and Tokomon's like, no, we shouldn't go with him. I don't trust him and everything. And, TK leaves his crest and his Digivice and such with Tokomon. And then this is when Tai shows back up, and Tai, Tokomon thinks that TK doesn't like him anymore, and likes Devimon better. And Tai shows up, and like he finds Tokomon, and they're like blah blah blah, and Tokomon explains like what happens, and Tai's like, well, let's go find DK because that doesn't sound right. And they go and they find TK, and Devimon tries to give them mushrooms to make them forget. And, Sora gives Agumon the warning about them, and then, Agumon goes and, stops tying TK from eating them. And so they're all better, and they stop Devimon, and this is Tokomon digivolves into Patamon again, and then of course they travel, they find Matt and Joe, and then Tai and Joe go off and they find Mimi, and then TK and Matt go and they find this is when they go and they find Izzy after Izzy's whole fiasco with kind of going dumb. And then they meet up again, they find Sora, and then they have to deal with Myotismon. And Myotismon goes to the real world, they find Jedi, they go back to Jedi gives them the ability to get back to the real world. And then of course they end up having to try to find the 8th Digidestined. And what ends up happening is at one point, Matt is trying to take TK back to where their mother lives, so that way TK can go home, or get TK back to like the train station or whatever it is that he has to go to get back home. And they end up, running into, this is where they run into Gatomon and Pumpkinmon. And TK and Matt and Patamon kind of have, and Gabumon kind of have some fun with the two of them. The two of them are just trying to they just want to have fun. That's why they wanted to come to the real world, because they wanted to have fun. It was different than the digital world. They weren't like the ones that was like want to help Myotismon like take over the human world or whatever. They just wanted to have fun. Digimon just want to have fun. I like Cyndi Lauper, okay? And and what ends up happening is, unfortunately, Myotismon comes around, and he, in the Japanese, he just outright kills Gatomon and Pumpkinmon in the 4Kids dub, or whatever the original English dub was. He imprisons them for disobedience. No, he just straight up kills them. And TK and Matt fight Myotismon in their honor, and he digivolves, TK, Patamon digivolves into Angemon, and he does have the ability, because he's an angel type Digimon, so he kind of has like holy power, I guess, type stuff. And of course Myotismon is a devil demon type Digimon, so Angemon's attacks are kind of think of it like very effective in Pokemon type rules. It's very effective. Fairy type power is very effective against like dark type power. Is like the best way to explain that. But Angemon is, of course, he's a champion, and Myotismon is quite a bit stronger than that. So it's not quite enough to be able to beat him. And then of course there's the whole fiasco with, Myotismon, puts a giant fog around the city, and, the rest of the Digidestined are trapped inside of the fog, and, he's trying to, Myotismon's trying to find Kari and, Gatomon, and get that information, and, kill Kari for all intents and purposes, and kill Gatomon. And TK and his mom are trying to get into the city from the other side, from the outside of the fog. And this is when, as I mentioned, this is when Joe shows up, and Joe and TK ride on Ikakumon into, in through the fog. And at one point, TK, they're attacked by Mega Seadramon, and yeah, it's Mega Seadramon. They're attacked, and TK falls off of Ikakumon, and Joe makes sure that TK doesn't drown, because he puts TK on this floating piece of wood so TK doesn't drown. But then of course Joe can't swim, and that's when Joe's reliability crest activates, and then they're able to get through and get into Odaiba or whatever it is proper, so that way they can go and fight against Myotismon and his goons. And of course, TK is there to witness what happens with Kari and Gatomon, and Wizardmon, and Gatomon turning into Angemomon. And then of course, then we have they defeat Myotismon, and then they have to deal with Venom Myotismon and the prophecy with arrows of light and hope, and TK's Angemon is the angel of hope, and Gatomon is the angel of light, and they have to shoot Matt and Ty with their with their arrows. I could have brought that arrow I have up. I forgot about that. Oh well. And they do that, and then we get Garurumon and Metal Greymon, and they defeat Venom Myotismon. And then of course we have the moment where TK, with the whole where TK, Matt, and their parents are all together for the first time in probably a long time. I mean, we don't know if if they ever got together for TK's birthday or Matt's birthday in this whole time frame, for it's or if it was just their dad would just send TK a present on his birthday, and maybe their mom would send Matt a present for his birthday or Christmas or whatever. We don't 100% know. And since we don't know 100% the reason why they got divorced, we don't know if it would just be something extremely hard for them to be around each other. As I said before, or I think I said this before, I don't think it was that either one of them cheated. That doesn't seem to be, and I don't think that they would be putting that into a kids show if they did. I don't think so. But what ends up happening is, of course, they end up having to go back to the digital world, because Jenna's like, well, there's big problems going on here, and there's these guys called the Dark Masters that are not fun, and we kind of need you to come back and take care of them, because there's giant rifts opening up into the sky that from the real world you can see into the digital world, and from the digital world you can see into the real world, and that's not good. So of course, they rainbow travel back to the digital world, and they have to start dealing with the Dark Masters. While there, at one point, it is Ty and Matt have their big argument and everything, and they find out who were the ones that chose them to be Digidestins. I'll go over those beings in a separate video. And what ends up happening is TK is like, well, I can be a big I can be a big kid. I can protect myself. And at one point he gets kidnapped by Puppetmon, and Puppetmon just wants to play with him, quote unquote. Lots of not safe games in Puppetmon's mansion, and TK ends up making friends with the Digimon that are in the mansion, and the Digidestined. TK is able to escape, and Matt kind of takes this as a thing of like, oh, TK doesn't really need me anymore. Oh, and this is kind of where that kind of starts to set in for Matt and everything. Oh, well, Ty would be a better big brother than I would. And, this is where that sets in for, some of Matt's issues. But, they defeat Puppetmon, and, then TK helps Sora keep an eye on Kari when she's sick, when Ty and Izzy have to go off to get Kari medicine when they're in, Machinedramon's territory. And what ends up happening is, TK, of course, helps protect Kari, and they end up in the sewer system. And so TK's there when Kari starts glowing. And I'll go over a little more about Kari glowing when I get to Kari's video, which will be the next one for the Digimon ones. And what ends up happening is, TK And Sora, one of the side effects of like Kari having all this power is that it kind of helps Biyomon and Patamon as well. It kind of gives them more energy. It doesn't make them Digivolve since they're not directly connected to Kari, but it does give them energy, which is helpful. And then, of course, TK is there when, War Greymon defeats Machine Dramon. And then, of course, then they have to deal with Lady Devimon, which I'll go over that fight a little bit more in Kari's video. And then they have to deal with Piedmon. Now, during the Piedmon battle, this is when Tai sends Sora and TK off to go and try to find Matt and Joe and the rest of their friends. And, TK and, TK and Sora go off to do that. And what ends up happening is this is when Sora has her, her depression type thing. As I said, it's a good analogy for it to help kind of explain it to kids in the beginning, to kind of explain what depression is. Admittedly, the way that, Sora and Matt get over their depression is a bit more abrupt than sometimes it is for someone who actually has depression. But it's a good way of kind of introducing that concept to children. Same thing with like the Dementors in Harry Potter, although the Dementors are a little bit scarier. But so TK is there, and Matt and Joe help get Sora out of her kind of depression, dark pit cave type thing, and then they head back, and and then this is when Piedmon starts turning all of them into keychains. And the last two that do not get turned into keychains are Kari and TK. And Gatomon already got turned into a keychain, or Anjumon got turned into a keychain. One of the two. I think it was just Gatomon. Got turned into a keychain. So Kari can't really do anything, and the only Digimon left is Anjumon. So Patamon / Anjumon, and TK hasn't been able to make him Digivolve yet at this point in time. Hasn't activated his crest yet. And what ends up happening is, Sora and Gomamon had managed to grab Matt's keychain and get it to TK. And kind of hearing Matt's voice in TK's head is what helps give TK hope. And of course, TK is a Digi destined of hope, has the crest of hope. I can point. I know I can point. There it is. Hope. They have the symbols in different spots on the shirt, so it's just like I can either point here and have it right, or I can point over here, and it's just like, oh no, wrong one. I still like the shirts though. I kind of wish the artist made some of these for like the season 2 kids, for Matt, or for like Davis and Yoli and Ken and Cody. I would have liked that, but they didn't, unfortunately. So I'll have to come up with something else to wear for those maybe. Back to Matt as a keychain talking to TK, and that activates his crest of hope. And this is when Anjumon digivolves into Magna Anjumon for the first time. Again, kind of like the way it was with Anjumon versus Devimon and Anjumon versus Myotismon to a degree. He does have kind of like super effective attacks against Piedmon, just because like Piedmon is more of a dark type Digimon. And Magna Anjumon grabs the keychains, and then he's able to restore everyone to their rightful forms. And then, of course, they're all digivolving, and they're all fighting against Myotismon, or Piedmon. And if I remember correctly, Magna Anjumon has this gate that I think is called Gate of Destiny or something, because he has kind of a lightsaber sword, in all honesty, that kind of pops out of his wrist, and he uses that to make like a giant golden gate. Not the Golden Gate Bridge, just like this giant, golden circle that they can then, throw Piedmon through, along with Piedmon's, cronies. They can throw them in there. It sucks them in, and they defeat Piedmon. Mimi shows up with the rest of their friends, and they're able to defeat Piedmon that way. And then, of course, they have to deal with Armageddon, or Patamon, and him and his issues, and, getting digitized and getting disassembled, and then they rally, and then they defeat Patamon. And then of course we have the moments where they all have to say goodbye to their Digimon, and Matt and TK and Patamon. I know the names. TK and Patamon. They're kind of both crying. They're like, wait a second. Why are you crying? I'm crying because you're crying, but I'm only crying because you're crying. So if we stop crying, then we'll both be okay. Well, I mean, it's not like the baby crying. It's it's like you're having to say goodbye to your best friend. And TK, out of all of them, has been the one that's already kind of had to say goodbye to Patamon, in regards to when they had to, when Patamon was destroyed, when Angemon was destroyed by Devimon. Um, and then of course we get, this is where we get, this is where the movie comes in, where they have to deal with, Diaboromon. TK and Matt are of course off visiting their grandma in the country. As I said, I'm pretty sure this is their father's mother, not their mother's parents, because their mother's parents are in France, which I'll go over, of course, a little bit later when we get to that moment. But they, they end up, finding they have to go to this barber shop because they're the only place in town with a computer with internet, because reasons, and it's just funny in the background. And there's like Floyd the barber, which is a direct reference to, the Andy Griffith Show, Floyd the barber there in Mayberry. I'm aware of Andy Griffith Show. Um, I just started working my way through like the Carol Burnett show. So if you're someone that knows who Carol Burnett is, just go watch Carol Burnett. She's amazing and wonderful and awesome and a national treasure. Um, and and if you don't know who that is, just go watch her anyway because she's awesome. Um, and just do that. But what ends up happening is, TK witnesses what happens with, Omnimon forming and everything, and they defeat Diaboromon. And then of course we have like in like the summer, because that's in like 2000 is when that happens, in like the summer, I guess either later that same summer, or like the summer of 2001, I guess possibly, is when, Jedi calls them all back to the digital world, and they have to give up their crest to, revitalize the digital barrier, the protective barrier. And then, of course, we get into 2002, which is, of course, where Digimon Adventure 2.0 comes in. TK is much more involved in this season as opposed to the other original six. Him and Kari, or TK and Kari, are much more involved in this season. So, at the beginning of it, it's TK starting at a new school. He lives in the same building as Yoli and Cody, so he meets them. And then, of course, he goes to the same school as where Davis is, and, him and Kari are, of course, in the same class. And Davis is very jealous of TK because, Davis has a huge crush on Kari, and TK and Kari are, already kind of, best friends. And, they end up having to go to the digital world because Ty sends them like this urgent help message, and they have to all go to the digital world, and Davis goes with them because he gets a Digivice. So do Yuli and Cody. But Davis is the one that goes first. And, they get there, and Davis is just kind of like freaked out about kind of everything. He's like, well, Ty mentioned a place called, Digimon, the digital world, and that there are a lot of Digimon there. And, so Davis isn't like 100% clueless as to what's going on, but he's not as familiar with it. And, TK is, of course, reunited with Patamon, and Kari gets to see Gatomon again, and they find Ty, and then, of course, they try all picking up the Digi-Egg, and then Davis picks it up, and he gets, the power, and he gets Vmon, and, then this is when they start down the path of having the power to be able to, fight against the Digimon Emperor. And, in the second episode is when, Yoli and Cody go, and they get their Digimon and their first Digi-Eggs. And then Kari and TK end up, I think it's either the third or the fourth episode, is when Kari and TK end up finding out that they also have armored Digi-Eggs that they can find. And they find, the Digi-Egg of Hope, which of course goes to TK, and they find the Digi-Egg of Light, which of course goes to Kari, and it changes their Digivices from the original white version into more of the colorful version. And so we start getting those moments. And then, of course, this is when TK, of course, gets the ability to digivolve Patamon into Pegasusmon. Now, I'll go over this a little bit in Ken's video, but also possibly just in a video about like the Digimon's, the Dark Spires and the Dark Rings and such, or the Control Spires. The Control Spires prevent Digimon from digivolving normally. So, TK couldn't digivolve, Patamon could not digivolve into Angemon normally. in this case because of the control spires. And but like armor digivolving gives them a way around that. So that's why the armor digivolving comes in. Um, Now, when it comes to armor digivolving, there are eggs for each crest. There is a crest egg for the crest of kindness, which goes with Ken, and I'll go over that. Unfortunately, in the actual anime series, we don't actually ever get to see Ken get like the digi egg of kindness, which I would have loved if they did, because the digi what Wormmon turns into is adorable, and I will go over that in Ken's video because it's just so cute. But there is a moment in like one of the audio dramas that they did for like the Japanese cast did, where like all the Digidestin, like their Matt Davis and their group, like their D terminals that hold their digi eggs get swapped, and then like they all activate like the wrong digi egg, but it still works on their Digimon. So it's like, this one turns into this and this one turns into that, and that's just funny. And I am gonna go over just a video where I talk about like the different armor digivolving, because that's just funny that happened, and I wish that had been like in the actual series. That would have been so funny. But TK and Kari are of course then able to start helping against fighting against the Digimon Emperor. And one of the things that ends up happening is at one point Kari ends up getting kind of left behind in this kind of like domed kind of computerized city at one point, and Davis and TK go back to try to get her. And this is when Patamon gets to digivolve into Angemon for the first time in this season, mostly because outside of the city there is no control spire, so he can digivolve. And he digivolves, and Davis is looking at Veemon and go, please tell me you can digivolve into an angel type Digimon, please, it's an angel something mon. And Veemon is like, no. And because Davis has a huge crush on Kari, blah 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 blah. And what ends up happening is Davis and Kari, or Davis and TK, have to work together in order to try to save Kari, which is kind of, Davis and TK have like this rivalry going on, and it's funny to watch, but it's like it's mostly just based around Kari, although like and like Davis always calls him like TC or TF or TP or whatever it is he wants to call TK for that day. Later on, he does start calling him TK, but just for a while, he just keeps getting his name wrong. And they end up, they help save Kari, and they end up interacting with Andromon in this case, who had been being controlled by the Dark Ring, and they're able to, they save this, city and everything, and they save Andromon. And so we get to watch this the rest of Digidestin. Davis and Yoli and Cody find their second digi egg, and Kari and TK don't ever get a second digi egg, but they of course already have, Kari has Gatomon that can digivolve into Angemon at this point in time, but she doesn't quite have access to that power yet again. And what ends up happening is, I would have been perfectly fine if they gave like Kari and TK like second digi eggs, but I understand why they didn't, because they already have like that set that Kari is light and TK is hope. But then there's an episode that is I don't remember if the episode is specifically called this, but Kari ends up being taken to this place that's called the Dark Ocean. The premise of the episode, and I'm talking about this now, and I'll talk about this more with Kari, is because TK and Kari are very connected, and Kari keeps kind of like fading in and out, and TK can see it happening, and he is of course very worried about this because Kari is his best friend. And what ends up happening is Kari ends up just kind of vanishing from school one day, and TK, looks all over for her, and, Gatomon and Patamon and him end up getting transported to this place. It's called the Dark Ocean, where Kari was at, and I'll go over that a little bit more in Kari's video. It's just this giant, like, very sepia-toned themed, like, beach setup. And there's even, like, a lighthouse that gives off dark light. It's actually a control spire inside of the lighthouse. And there are these, Digimon, but they're not actually Digimon. They're, like, weird, entities of darkness, and admittedly there's like something off in the ocean that kind of looks a lot like Cthulhu. The Dark Ocean is going to get its own video, in all honesty, from what we kind of learn about it, between because Kari ends up getting dragged there and Ken ends up getting dragged there at one point, and there's a few other characters. that have like a connection to the Dark Ocean, that it causes problems. And like TK shows up and he's able to help Kari, and it's kind of one of those moments where it's like it is kind of Kari's equivalent of going into like that dark cave or that dark pit that Sora or Matt went into in the first season. It's just that because Kari is light, Kari represents light. That her opposite is the very extreme version of darkness, and that's just kind of one of the problems that comes up with that. This is the main part in the season or in the series where we see this happen with Kari. Barring what happens in Adventure Try, which yeah, barring the whole or Digimon incident in Digimon Try, which will be coming up. But what ends up happening is, TK saves Kari, and then this is of course then later on this leads into of course the anniversary setup where they're all all the Digidestined are getting together, and they're having their big anniversary for when they defeated Myotismon. And what ends up happening is of course TK and Kari are of course at the place for TK witnesses what happens with Gatomon and Kari getting reunited with Wizardmon. And what ends up happening is they find that you have to save Ken with kindness type of a thing. And one of the things that happens is, and I don't remember if it's ever specifically stated like when exactly like the Digimon movie, the third part from the original movie, when that happens in like specific time frame for the Digimon series. I always just kind of look at it as it happens after they defeat Ken, because like they're all kind of all relaxing a little bit more. So I'm gonna talk about that after I finish up with like when they beat Ken and save Ken. And what ends up happening is Kari or TK, of course, TK and Matt, of course, have their like bonding moments and everything. And TK and their dad seem to have gotten a better relationship, and I think Matt and their mom seem to have gotten a bit of a better relationship. Yeah, not like the parents are ever gonna get back up. Not like TK and Matt can pull off like a Parent Trap switch and like try to. Hi, Mom. I'm TK. You're Matt. Go back to your dad's house. I love you. TK's mom doesn't like their mom doesn't even look up from her computer where she's typing. Just Matt comes in dressed as TK. Try to like do like a slightly higher pitched voice for TK. Hi, Mom. Patamon and I. It's Gabumon dressed up like Patamon. We're gonna go into my room and do my homework. Hi, Matt. Hi, Gabumon. Tell your dad I said hi, and please send TK back home. This Parent Trap thing will not work. Matt, no, I'm TK. Like TK's at their dad's house. Like the dad gets home. Why is everything clean? TK dressed as Matt, has his hair like poking up a bit like Matt does, trying to act like Matt. Even has like Matt's guitar out. Patamon dressed up. Well, Patamon would like be hiding because like Gabumon's not actually in the real world yet. But like just like I don't know, just funny sequence of like TK and Matt trying to do that. Like the dad's like, I'm very happy to see you, TK, and I'm very happy that the apartment is clean, but please go back to your mother's because that's where you're supposed to be, and please send Matt back, and just like that whole sequence. I don't know, I bit of levity. Okay. And like so they end up then of course the Digidestined go back to the digital world, and this is when of course they're going to try to defeat Ken for the try to beat Ken with kindness. And so in this moment we actually get to see a bit of TK's kind of dark side. Not like he goes like insane or anything like that, or not like Patamon like dark digivolves or anything like that, but Ken, Digimon Emperor, had been trying to create a Digimon. He creates a Digimon that's called Chimeramon. which is it's a chimera. It's made up of pieces of other Digimon. It's, wings from this, head from this, jaw from this, arms and legs from this, and body from this, and, just kind of all mixed and matched together. Um, and TK find or Ken kind of found like this like source of evil, or of power of evil or whatever in the digital world, and he wants to absorb it so that way he can then use it to give life and create Chimeramon. And TK witnesses this, and of course out of the darkness comes Devimon. Devimon is the representation of that, which, as I mentioned a little bit in Matt's video, TK was the one that lost their Digimon the first time, was the first one out of the group to lose their Digimon partner. And it, that's something that, like, even if that had happened to, like, even if, like, Matt had been the first one to, like, lose Gabumon, if he lost Gabumon, that early on in the adventure, it still would have, like, given him, it still would have not, like, messed him up, but it would have definitely given him pause. TK had just met Patamon, and then he lost him. But TK actually, his anger kind of gets the better of him, and he ends up going and he, like, physically gets into a fight with Ken, with the Digimon Emperor, like, punches Ken. The two of them are fighting. Ken has his whip and he's trying to use it against TK, and TK is just not even phased. The whip kind of hits TK across the cheek, or, like, Ken tries to punch TK. Ken tries to punch TK, and he gets sliced from the Ken's whip, and TK's not even phased by this. He's like, so you always resort to violence as your problem to try to solve your problems. And this is kind of just one of those moments where you see Ken, Digimon Emperor, just kind of, like, pause and stop, and he's just like, yes. And and TK goes against Ken, and he kind of physically fights Ken, and then Wormmon shows up to try to help Ken, because Ken is still his Digi destined, and TK leaves, and Ken gets Chimeramon, and he uses that to start causing more problems in the digital world. And the Digi destined, then of course they end up having to defeat Ken. And what ends up happening is they end up making their way into, like, the base where he has his his Digimon Emperor base, that of course can fly and be underwater and sit in the ground. Hey, it's a very multi-purpose base. I'll give Ken that. He thought that through when he was making that base. And the Digimon and the Digidestin, work their way through the base and everything. And this is, when Ty and Matt and Izzy are off, camping with Ty and with Matt and TK's dad as, like, a cover story. And TK and the rest of the group end up watching as Davis finds this Digi Egg that's called the Digi Egg of Miracles, that then allows Davis to have Vemon Digivolve into Magnamon, which I'll go over in Davis's video a little bit more. And he's then able to help, defeat Chimeramon and save Ken. And then, of course, Ken then loses Wormmon. And, TK has some sympathy for Ken in that moment. Because TK knows how it feels to lose his Digimon. Out of all of the group, TK knows how that feels. And this is when, of course, Ken starts turning around and getting better. And, a little bit later on, as Ken starts coming into the group and everything, little by little. But what ends up happening is, of course, this is kind of where I put the time for, like, when the third part of the first movie takes place. Hurricane Touchdown, or whatever it's called, where they deal with Willis and Kokomon. So TK and Kari were in New York, and they were visiting Mimi. And they end up seeing Willis and Terriermon and Wendigomon, who is the kind of the champion version of Kokomon. And they see them, and then Willis runs off, and Kari and TK send Davis and the rest of the group a message. Davis and the other two a message. It was like, come to Colorado and everything. And so it was like, first of all, 3 teenagers, flying on a plane from Japan to Colorado or to wherever in the States and blah, 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 blah. And, Kari and TK are on their way to, Colorado, and they end up dealing with, Wendigomon on the train and everything. And then, of course, they get to where Davis and Willis and the rest of the group are. And Anjumon and Anjumon digivolve into their mega forms because they have to release the golden digi eggs, as they say. And on Magna, Anjumon digivolves all the way into Seraphimon. First time we get to see Seraphimon in the series, and then we have Gatomon or Anjumon. Anjumon digivolves all the way into Magnadramon, who is just this very pretty pink dragon Digimon that I loved. And they release the Digi Eggs, and this allows Davis and Willis to be able to digivolve their golden armor, digivolve their Digimon, and they're able to defeat Kokomon, who is digivolved all the way up to the virus corrupted form of Cherubimon at this point in time, and they defeat that. And then, of course, then they say goodbye to Willis, and Willis goes off, and Willis will get his own video. And Willis has Terriermon and Kokomon back again. And then, of course, then we kind of get back into the main series where TK, the rest of the group are like, well, now we're going to start trying to rebuild the Digimon Emperor's base. Or not rebuild the base, we're going to start rebuilding the digital world. And what ends up happening is, this is when Ken starts coming into the group more. They start learning about the Control Spire Digimon and Kenimon and Mamemon, and they have to work together. And this is when the DNA digivolving comes into play because Ken and Davis end up being able to DNA digivolve their Digimon into Pyldramon, and then of course Yoli and Kari can DNA their digivolve into Sylphimon. Again, go over in their videos. And Cody realizes that he and TK will become partners when it's time for their Digimon to DNA digivolve. And Cody and TK just kind of have a hard time trying to get that to, the two of them have a hard time getting to mesh. TK kind of saw what happened, or Cody kind of saw what happened with TK when he saw what happened when he saw Devimon again, when Ken was sucking up all that evil energy, and it's just one of those moments where it's very hard to watch. And Cody goes and he talks to Matt, as I mentioned, and he's trying to figure out from Matt, like, well, what what was some of the, what happened with TK that makes him act this way? And Matt's like, well, when we first got to the digital world, the first big Digimon that we ended up having to fight against was Devimon, and, blah, 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 blah. TK lost Patamon, and, back then, we didn't know if he was going to be able to come back, but he did. And it just kind of, it was a very impressionable thing to happen to TK, which makes sense. And, so we have that moment, and then we have the moment where they're having to fight against Black War Greymon. As I said, Black War Greymon will go to his own video, but he's trying to destroy these things that are called Destiny Stones, that are these stones that are kind of help keep the digital world's barrier stable between the digital world and the real world. And they find this, there's like 7 or 8 of these things, and he's trying to destroy each of them for reasons. And he ends up, the Digimon, the Digidestin are trying to find the Destiny Stones beforehand to try to, save them and protect them from Black War Greymon. And they end up coming across one Destiny Stone, and TK is very determined to protect the Destiny Stone, and Anjumon ends up digivolving all the way up to Magna Anjumon in order to fight against Black War Greymon. That doesn't end up, it does some damage to Black War Greymon, but it doesn't beat him. And, so we get that moment. That Destiny Stone unfortunately still gets destroyed. And then we have it where the Digidestin end up in like this kind of like, I would call it like Digi Chinatown or something like that, because they end up in this place that's like full of restaurants that kind of look like, a Japanese or like Asian themed restaurants. And they end up finding the other Destiny Stone. And what ends up happening is they find the last Destiny Stone. and they're protecting it. And then, of course, this Digimon that's called Azulongmon shows up because he, is kind of summoned via their power working together. And this is when TK and Cody, when their Digimon DNA digivolved for the first time, and this is where we get Shikuamon comes into play. And what ends up happening is, and then they get some backstory from like Azulongmon. He's like, well, this is what happened here, and this is why this, and this is why this, and you guys are doing great. And he kind of like scolds Blackboard Greymon. Azulongmon, I'll talk about Azulongmon and the other, because he's what's called the Celestial Digimon, or like the four Guardian Digimon or something like that. So I'll go over them at one point. And but this is when TK and Cody fully, they have that moment. And Ken and TK have kind of gotten over the hurdle of the whole problem with, Ken was the Digimon Emperor, and now he's atoning for his mistakes, and they can tell that it wasn't 100% his own choosing. But what ends up happening is, of course, then we get to Christmas, and of course, they get the older Digidestin, the younger Digidestin surprise the older Digidestin with their Digimon. And while the older group are off at Matt's concert, Ken actually invites the rest of the Digidestin, the younger group, to his house, to his apartment with his parents, for like a just kind of like a little Christmas party night. And they're all happy to come. And so we just have this moment where it's just like this little, friends hanging out, which I love, which is just adorable. And, but then of course, then they have to go deal with the Digimon that attack the concert. And then of course we have the problems with, and of course we have the Digimon World Tour moment where we have all of the, all the Digidestin have to, travel all over different places around the world. And Tai and Matt, or Tai and TK, of course, go to Paris, where they meet TK and Matt's grandfather, who is, I'm assuming, their mother's grandfather, given the last names. And they meet him, and they end up meeting Catherine, who is the French Digidestin, and her Digimon, Floramon, and they have to deal with like Mamemon and Big Mamemon and Metal Mamemon and Giromon, who are just like these annoying bomb-related type Digimon, and they defeat them. TK and Tai both kiss. Both kiss her on the cheeks, and then of course their grandpa, her TK's grandpa, kind of does the same thing, and Agumon and Patamon kind of flirt with Floramon, and then of course they go back, and then of course they have to deal with the Dark Spore children and Oikawa. And what ends up happening is TK and the rest of the group, this is one of the moments where they very much prove that Ken is their friend, because not only are they trying to try to stop Ken because he gets kind of kidnapped, they're trying to save Ken. At one point Ken has to kind of like delve into his own darkness in order to try to send this one very evil Digimon back, send it into the Dark Ocean world. And TK and the rest of the group have to help Ken so that way he doesn't succumb to the darkness, tapping into the darkness but doesn't succumb to it. And they're able to help with that, and he's able to overcome that. And then they send the Digimon away. And the Digimon is called Daemon. He's just this very evil, very powerful type Digimon that brings Lady Devimon and a bunch of these other very strong evil Digimon with him to the real world. This is the moment where like Kari and Tai end up having the conversation about the fact that the younger Digidestin kind of need to understand the fact of like sometimes you do have to kill Digimon. That not all Digimon can just be stopped if you get rid of a black ring or a dark spiral or a control spire. Sometimes you have to destroy them. And that's where that moment comes in, where I talked about with Matt, with Tai and Kari, where I talked about that. And what ends up happening is, of course, then they have to deal with the Dark Spore children and Oikawa, and TK and the rest of the group, TK and the younger group end up following Oikawa and the kids, and they end up in this, they don't end up in the Digi world, they end up in this like weird dream world. There's a world that has the power to like tap into people's dreams, and they end up having to deal with Malomyotismon, because he reveals that he's been in control of Oikawa this entire time, whispering in his ear for the past several years. And what ends up happening is Malomyotismon uses a power that kind of basically traps all of the Digidestin, the four Digidestin that are there. Well, the six of them actually. Yeah, six of them in like an illusion. And it's supposed to be like they're in an illusion that is like their perfect dream. You know, Kari's is a world where Digimon and humans can live together, you know, and TK's dream is him and Matt and their parents just sitting down and having a nice dinner together as a family. And just like, you know, their parents getting along and everybody's happy. And you know, and that's what TK's dream was. That would be, you know, a dream where he would be happy to be trapped in. And, you know, but, you know, it's like Patamon shows up in the illusion and he's like, no, TK, this isn't real. And, you know, they end up, you know, he's like, no, TK, this isn't real. You're actually supposed to be fighting right now. And it, you know, and like he breaks out of that. And, you know, he doesn't want that to not be real because he wants his family to be able to be kind of whole. And I understand that. I think kids of like, you know, children of divorce know how that feels. It's like, you know, it's like my parents don't hate each other. My parents didn't have like a huge ugly divorce, but you know, it was, you know, it was still hard on you when you were a kid when that happened. I was like 9 or 10 when that happened and that still hurt. Um, but you know, you want those moments where it's like, you know, even if it's just for a little while, you want that moment where it's just, you know, you and your parents and your sibling or siblings, just, you know, everybody's happy, everybody's together, and you know, just that moment where you're a family. So I think out of all the ones that like the Digidestin's kind of a dreams type thing, the illusion that that they get kind of trapped in, I think TK is the one that I can understand the most. Not that I don't understand, you know, Ken's or Cody's or Kari's. Yoli is she just wants all the dessert for herself. Um, but like Kari's and Cody's and Ken's, I understand where those come from. But like Davis wasn't affected by it, and he appears in TK's and he helps, you know, kind of break TK out of the illusion, and then the rest of them show up in Ken's and they help him break out of his illusion. And then of course all of them are then able to, you know, they're able to have their Digimon not just be in one form but in like all of their forms. So you know, it's like all the armor digivolving, there, all the regular digivolving, all the DNA digivolving, you know, all the different levels of that just happen. And you know, so they're all able to have that at the same time, and they're all just able to do like tons and tons of damage to Malomyotismon. And then of course they get knocked into the digital world, and then it's just, you know, oh, it's just back to normal. All the DNA Digimon are there, but the, you know, the rest of them all kind of vanished. And this is, you know, Malomyotismon tries to cover the world in darkness, but then, you know, the Digidestin that are on Earth, you know, Tai and the rest of the group, and then, you know, Mimi and all the rest of the Digidestin around the world are using their lights, and they, you know, they weaken Malomyotismon's darkness, and then of course they light travel to the digital world, and then of course they use the light from their Digivices in order to weaken Malomyotismon, so that way he's you know, they can defeat him, and then, you know, they fight, they destroy Malomyotismon and destroy that darkness. And then of course, you know, they help the Dark Spore children, and I'll go over a little bit more of that in their own video, because Dark Spore children will get their own video. And what ends up happening is then, of course, then we cut to like that summer of 2003 where they have to deal with Diaboromon, and TK and Kari go online with Matt and Tai to, of course, help their brothers against Diaboromon online. And then, of course, they have to deal with, you know, Armageddon in the real world, and they show up, and they have to deal with, you know, Omnimon and the Omniblade and Imperial Dramon Paladin mode, and they defeat Armageddon, you know, all that fun stuff. And then we get into Digimon Tri. TK and Kari, I believe, are supposed to be in middle school at this point in time. I think they're going to two different middle schools, or they might go to the same one. I don't 100% know, but I'm going to state this here. And again, I still have the problem with the fact that I understand that Digimon Adventure Tri was supposed to be mainly about the original 8. I understand this, but you completely ignore the fact that TK and Kari, like, completely ignore the fact that, like, Davis, Ken, Yoli, and Cody aren't even there. Like, TK and Cody are DNA digivolving partners and kind of best friends. Same thing with Kari and Yoli, and yet they don't seem to make a boo about the fact that none of them are there. That they seem to have vanished off the face of the earth. And, that's my grievance with Digimon Adventure Tri. That's kind of roughly my only grievance with Digimon Adventure Tri. For the most part, the rest of the specials that they did are perfectly fine. I just have the problem with that they don't pay any attention to the fact that, like, Kari and that, like, Davis, Ken, Yoli, and Cody aren't even there. Okay, but they're in school and everything, and TK and Matt are, of course, fine with each other. TK's talking about a girl to, take a girl to Matt's concerts, and Matt's, like, teasing him about it. And then, of course, they end up having to deal with the Kawagamon attack, and they get reunited with their Digimon. And then they end up meeting Mako and Meikumon. And then they end up dealing with, then they go to the spa, and they have the fun at the spa. And then we kind of have, then the cultural festival kind of comes along. TK and Kari aren't super involved in the cultural festival, but TK and Kari go to the cultural festival, and they go to, like, the cafe where Mimi, that Mimi and Mako's class are doing, where, Mimi and Mako are dressed up like cheerleaders. And, so we have those moments. And then, of course, they have to deal with, this is when, Mimi and Joe have to get over their darkness, and they get their, ultimate level Digimon, or Mega Digimon, whichever. And, we have those moments. And then, of course, we have, in the third season, or the third one, Confession, what ends up happening is this is when the Digimon all start to realize that they are infected. And I think Patamon is the first one to realize that he's infected, and TK is actually kind of the one that notices. And one of the things that happens when a Digimon is infected by this virus is that it kind of makes them go kind of rabid. So it kind of makes them attack and growl, and at one point it makes Patamon, like, bite TK at one point. And it's just kind of like TK just has to, like, stand there and kind of just, like, hold Patamon until he calms down. And Izzy had kind of made the comment that was like, well, we need to keep the Digimon, if we keep the Digimon, in, like, one place or something like that, then it's less likely that the virus will spread. They don't realize that their Digimon are already infected. And what ends up happening is TK, Patamon is kind of the one that tells the rest of the group, yeah, I'm infected. And, Tentamon explains that he's infected too, and they just, they're all just like, well, we need to spend time with our Digimon, and with our Digi-Destined, and, Patamon keeps getting worse and worse, unfortunately. And TK ends up telling Mako that Patamon is infected, and she tries to tell them that it will be all right, and that she's sorry. And, well, it's actually she tries to tell him that it's all right, and that she's sorry, and that it isn't her fault. And TK and Mako, they kind of end up having a moment, and I think the moment actually happens after the reboot. But, like, it's like, TK and Patamon are just kind of, TK just kind of keeps holding Patamon every time that the virus acts up. And Patamon just keeps getting, more and more scared about that, because he doesn't want to lose TK. He doesn't want to leave TK. And, Tentamon's infected too, and he doesn't want to leave Izzy. None of the Digimon want to leave their Digimon partners. And, and then of course then the reboot happens, and there's all the Digidestin are there, they're Digimon, and that they're all Patamon's kind of the thing, they're all infected at this point in time, and then of course the whole reboot happens, and TK actually goes and visits Mako after the reboot happens, and explains to her that we're going to the digital world, we're going to go and get our Digimon back. Um, but like, after the reboot, it's like all the Digidestin just break down in tears at losing their friends, at losing, this part of them. And like Matt's there, and like Matt just like hugs TK as he just cries. And like TK's not the one that's lost his Digimon twice. You can't blame them in the slightest for how they feel. I mean, and it's like in our world it's hard enough to lose a pet. It's and that, with the Digimon, it's this whole sentient being type thing. It's not an easy thing to do. And what ends up happening is, TK goes and he visits Mako, and he is angry, and he is, he explained to him, it's like, you're the one that's the source of the infection. Mekumon is the source of this infection. You're kind of the problem with this, but he, it's just, but he still says, I'm angry at you, but I still forgive you. And this just kind of throws Mako for a loop, which I don't blame her for being thrown for a loop. She was expecting TK probably to just keep being angry at her the entire time and not forgive her. And then, of course, they go to the digital world, and they find the baby versions of their Digimon, and, they still don't, the Digimon, of course, don't remember them. I apologize if you hear a squeaking in the background. That is the chair. And, they start trying to rebond with their Digimon, and, then, of course, they end up getting all, they feed the Digimon, and then they get all split up, and, they're all just, they all get sent different places. I think Patamon gets sent up. Patamon is, I think, with Joe and Palmon for a while, but TK ends up in Primary Village. And he's, he gets to see Elecmon again, and Elecmon doesn't remember him because Elecmon got rebooted too. And so we get that moment, and TK is just sitting there talking to Elecmon at one point. And then, of course, the Digidestin all get, reunited again, and they have to deal with Dark Jedi and his problems, and, they all start, they all get their, their Digivolving ability back, and, Patamon gets Digivolves all the way up to, Seraphimon, into Angemon, into Magna Angemon, into Seraphimon, and everything. And so we get that moment, and then, of course, we have the moment where they end up back in the real world, and they end up at the school, and TK tells a scary story, and then all the Digimon freak out, which is just funny. And then, they end up back in the digital world, and then, everything happens with Tai and Nishijima, and then Kari kind of goes cuckoo, and this is when Ordinimon comes into play, and, oh boy, and, yeah. And, then, TK kind of watches over Kari during the time frame when they're dealing with their Dinamon. He's kind of in charge of keeping an eye on her, while the older ones kind of try to figure out a way to deal with their Dinamon. And, so they do that, and then TK and, Kari wakes up, and she's a little better. She's not as... Where's Tai? Everything is going to die because I don't know where Tai is. She's not in that mode anymore. And I'll go over that with Kari. And we get this moment where TK, Izzy, of course, hacks Mekumon and gets all the Digimon's memories back, so they're able to, they all Digivolve, and of course they all fully Digivolve, and they Digivolve into, Omnimon. Merciful mode, and then of course they defeat Ordinimon, and then they're all reunited with their Digimon that have their full memories back, and Mako is unfortunately left on her own, but of course she's still their friend. And then of course we cut to 2010 in the Digimon timeline, which is Digimon 2020, the last evolution. Tai and the rest of the group are, of course, all approaching adulthood. TK and Kari, I think, are either in high school at this point in time. Yeah, I think TK and Kari are supposed to be in high school at this point in time. And because like Matt and Ty are in like such are in college right now, and of course Mimi's off running her internet fashion empire, and Joe's studying to be a doctor, and Izzy is working on having his giant tech company, and TK is actually working on being a writer. He's writing a novel. And they deal with Patamon at the beginning, and then of course they end up then they meet Minowa, and she's like, gives them the whole explanation as to, well, Digimon only, Digimon partners can only be with their Digimon because they have so much potential, and then when that stops and the Digimon goes away, and TK and Izzy go online with Matt and Tai when they go to try to fight Eosmon online, which doesn't really help, and of course we get the that battle, and then TK and Kari both kind of get kidnapped, and they both get put into the comas and such, and Patamon and Gatomon are kind of gone, and then of course TK and Matt, or Tai and Matt, of course, go to fight Minowa, and TK and Kari are in like their own little worlds there with Minowa, and like the crystal world type thing that she made for all the Digi Destined, and they end up, and of course they, Minowa uses them to try to fight against their brothers, of course, and Tai blows the whistle, and they wake up, and then of course they all work together, and then of course we get Agumon Bond of Courage, or Bond of Courage, and Gabumon Bond of Friendship modes and everything, and we get that whole battle against Eosmon, and then they're all freed, and they all wake up. And then of course we, this, Tai and Matt, of course, then have to say goodbye to their Digimon. But it's, there's still, there's that hope that they'll get to see their Digimon again, of course. As I've said, and I'm not the only one, it's like if they have kids, then that's, more potential there type of a thing. Speaking of kids, now we move into Digimon 2027 in the timeline, which is, of course, TK is, he's an adult by now. He's an author. He writes various stories based on the adventures in the digital world. So it's kind of, he's kind of the one that, maybe like, it's being told through his eyes, all these adventures that they had. He seems to have gotten married. We have no idea who his wife is. And he has a son who has a Tokamon. The son looks exactly like him. We don't know who the wife is. Guess it's a possibility that maybe his wife was like maybe Catherine from, France. Maybe, maybe they got together later on, or, he just met some other girl. Like maybe it was the girl that he wanted to take to Matt's concert. We don't know. We have no idea. And then, of course, we get into their family. We, of course, have Hiroki Ishida, who is, of course, their father, Nancy Takaishi, who is, of course, their mother. Matt's his brother, of course. They have Kinu, who is their grandmother, who seems to be the mother on their grandmother on their father's side. And then, of course, we have Michael Takaishi, who is seems to be Nancy's father, who's off in France. We don't ever learn their mother's name. The mother's the writer. Their father is, of course, works at the TV station. They got divorced at one point. TK, of course, went to go live with their mom. Matt lived with their dad. Not too much else there that I didn't go over in Matt's video. I would hope that the relationship between the four of them has gotten better, particularly between Nancy and Matt. I would hope that has gotten better. And then, of course, we have, he has his future son, and then, of course, we have TK and Matt's relationship in and of itself. TK very much looked up to Matt, and Matt does go out of his way quite a bit to protect TK, particularly in the beginning of their adventure. By the time the second season rolls around and everything, he's very much like, TK can handle himself, and I'll show up if he wants me to. You know, they have their moments where it's just like, you know, Matt doesn't quite know how to be a brother as well as Ty does because Matt hasn't been around TK as much. I think it was stated that because, you know, TK ended up getting to go with them to the summer camp because Matt was there and it was like special permission type of a thing. Um, since TK didn't go to the same school. And, you know, like, so it's a little bit of an odd thing there. Um, you know, but it gets better. And of course, you know, Matt and TK have a very good relationship later on. They joke a lot with each other. I'm pretty sure that like Matt gets, you know, like TK goes and visits, you know, Matt and their dad a lot more. Um, you know, between, you know, with the end of the first season and the second season, I'm sure he gets to go and visit them a lot more. They probably don't end up ever having the ability to do it. It's like all four of them around a dinner table, but maybe that's something that, you know, in that whole time frame between when, you know, when Digimon Adventure 2.0 when that kind of ended, and then of course into the epilogue, maybe there's like a time frame in there where they maybe like TK maybe got up the courage to like ask his mom and ask his dad, could we have a nice family dinner, just, you know, the four of us together, and, you know, we cook and just, you know, just have a family dinner for the first time in a long time. You know, I think that, you know, I think that that their parents would be fine with that, that they would be perfectly happy to have, you know, have them come and everything. I think that that would be perfectly fine. You know, Nancy would be okay with having them come over, and maybe TK is able to convince them. You know, not like, you know, he's like, I know it's never gonna be like 100% thing, but can we at least try? You know, I think that he would be okay with that. Um, and then of course we get into Ty. Ty kind of takes his a little bit like an older brother figure to TK for a while, of course, in the beginning, and Matt, you know, doesn't really like this, and that kind of does lead to some of their you know, head butting between Matt and Ty. Um, and, you know, TK, of course, later on, he's more mature in the second season. Ty is more, you know, much more just like Matt. He's like, he can handle himself, and if he needs help, I'll show up and help. Sora does act like an older sister to TK. She does act like an older sister to Kari as well. You know, he goes with her multiple times to kind of for her to help keep him safe, but also because he can help her at times. You know, he doesn't, you know, he told her, you know, TK tells her at one point that um, that when she's around, that when TK is around Sora, he doesn't miss his mother as much, just because Sora kind of gives off that vibe of, you know, kind of like the group mom. Um, TK and Izzy kind of share a like of computers apparently. You know, they, you know, some childlike interaction because he kind of like, you know, TK is kind of interested in the computers and everything and coding. Um, and, you know, so he helps with that. And, you know, they talk to each other a lot. You know, Izzy and TK have like a fine relationship. Um, you know, just, you know, different things like that. TK and Mimi, you know, I think she's a little strange at the beginning, just as much as she's interested in clothes and everything, but they're still good friends. Joe is, you know, protective of TK and everything. They, you know, work together at apparently, you know, wood shop class at the camp, even though TK almost cut off Joe's finger. And of course, Joe risked his life, of course, to protect TK when the two of them almost drowned. Um, back when dealing with Myotismon. But, you know, later on, Joe's like, yeah, TK can handle himself and everything. Kari and TK in the original season, TK, because he was more familiar with the digital world, he did kind of take on a little bit more of wanting to protect Kari when they first went back to the digital world, because she's kind of, you know, he was the youngest member of the group, and now she's the newest one in the group, and he just doesn't want her to get hurt, of course. He's very protective of her, and, you know, he helps keep an eye on her when, you know, when Ty and Izzy go off to try to find medicine, of course, for Kari when she's sick. And then, of course, when we get into the second season, they hang, you know, they're very good friends, of course. They still hang around each other a lot, along with the rest of the group. You know, Davis doesn't like this. And, you know, so there's a lot of issues with that, but, you know, TK and Kari, of course, very, very close. And TK is, he's kind of the one that goes after Kari, of course. I mean, like, Davis tries to go after Kari when she gets sucked into the Dark Ocean world, but TK is the one that's able to get to her. And I don't remember if this was in the actual Japanese or if it was just in the English dub, but like in that episode, TK does tell Kari that he cares about her a lot. And then at one point in, I think it was one of the audio dramas, TK and Kari do admit that they do care for each other a lot and that they are very protective of each other and they will go out of their way to protect each other. And one of the, but it's, I don't think that they end up with each other. I don't think that Kari and TK end up with each other. I mean, if they did, that's fine. Admittedly, I just kind of more go for Kari and Davis because Davis is kind of the underdog in that respect, and I kind of will root for the underdog a little bit in certain cases. But if TK and Kari ended up getting together, then that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Although, like in the first movie, and like the when they go to New York and everything with Mimi's like, or Kari's just like, well, I brought Davis along for company, and then also to make Davis, brought TK along for company, and also to make Davis jealous. And then of course, Davis and TK do not get along very well in the beginning, not at all. Davis tries to compete against TK so much they even end up fighting at various points in times. But TK will take over when Davis is absent in regards to taking over as like the leader of the group for the time being. And of course, later on in the season, Davis and TK get much better at dealing with each other, and they're much more just actual friends. And it works much better. And TK and Davis stops calling him like TK or TP or TJ or PJ or whatever it is that he calls him all the time. And then if he just he does start calling him, just calls him TK. Davis does act irrationally sometimes though, so that's just kind of funny to watch. And they do get better acquainted. And David, TK can tell that Davis likes Kari, of course, and enjoys like teasing Davis about that. So yeah, that's kind of fun. And of course, TK and Yoli, they live in the same apartment building along with Cody. And what ends up happening is Yoli kind of helps a lot with, it's like if TK has tech problems, I mean, like TK can always just go and ask Izzy for questions if he has tech questions, but still, they get along fine. They're Digi-destined. He thinks that she's a very, lively girl and everything, and she's very, entertaining. TK and Cody are, of course, DNA Digivolving partners. And, so we get that for, Shikuamon. And it does take them a little while to get to that part, get to the point where they can, where they have that bond that's strong enough to do that. And, TK and Ken, back when Ken was a Digimon Emperor, TK was very disgusted with him, at, toying with darkness and everything when he made Chimeramon. And of course, him and Ken get into the fist fight. And then, of course, later on, Ken and TK are of course much better friends after Ken is no longer the Digimon Emperor, and he proves that he wants to be good, and they get much better with that relationship, and I like that. TK did agree with Davis that Ken did change when he was no longer the Digimon Emperor, but it still took a little while because Ken, I think, did apologize to each of them individually at some point. But they still get along great. TK and Ken still work together quite well. We don't get super instances where they do work together extremely well, or where it's specifically the two of them have to work together now. It's mostly Davis and Ken that have to end up working together. Or at one point Cody and Ken, which I'll go over in Cody and Ken's videos. But we get those moments. That's about what we have here for TK. Yes, the next Digimon character that I will go over will of course be Kari, and of course Gatomon, and I'll have a lot more angels behind me for that one, simply just because Anjuamon. After I do Kari's video, I'm just going to do some miscellaneous Digimon videos that kind of just talk about kind of the evil Digimon that they deal with in the original series. So like Devimon and Etamon and Myotismon and Apocalypmon. Some of those and some of the Digimon friends that they have in the original series. Um, and I might go over like Primary Village, and maybe a few other bits, like how the original 8 were chosen to be the Digidestined, and then I'll go into doing stuff with then I'll do Davis and Yoli and Cody and Ken and Willis and the miscellaneous Digidestined. Um, I am gonna do a video of Digimon where I just talk about kind of like what Digimon meant to me. I'm gonna do this with a lot of different anime. Um, which is well, I really like the anime and everything, and this is kind of what I got out of it, but this is mostly going to apply to like the anime that I watched when I was growing up as a kid. So, you know, Digimon, yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh, Card Captors, Sailor Moon, Pokemon, um, that type of stuff. The ones that I watched when I was a kid, and then even just other anime down the line that like I ended up getting into, where it's just like, well, I can kind of talk about it a little bit. I mean, I kind of want to do like this thing where I talk about the different card captors characters. But, at the moment, I just kind of, I want to get some of the Digimon stuff done, and then I'll like intersperse it with some other stuff. Um, Once I get the rest of the Digimon characters recorded. So that's what I have for you. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. And different Digidestin kind of teach us different things. TK kind of just reminds us that we have to keep hope alive. That hope is a very fragile thing, and it can be extremely powerful, and it can also be, hope can be very easily crushed or snuffed out, but even from embers, it can come back and it can grow and it can become extremely, extremely powerful thing. So just remember that in regards to hope. So, yep, that's what I have for you. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye. When you can't think of anything to say, do you always resort to fighting? I guess that's your problem. You don't know when to talk and when to fight. Now's a good time to talk. On the other hand, it's also a good time to fight.